She sat perfectly still in the examination room, her weathered hands folded across her lap, trembling slightly. The ultrasound monitor flickered with an image that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. But Rebecca Mitchell's face had gone white, her fingers frozen on the probe behind her. Dr. Richardson leaned closer to the screen, his breath catching audibly. "Mrs. Hutchins," he whispered, "how long have you known Eleanor Hutchins?" 72 years old, met his eyes with the calm of someone who had carried an impossible secret for longer than most people live. A single tear traced the deep lines of her cheek. 52 years, she said quietly. "I've been pregnant for 52 years. The room fell into absolute silence. On the screen, unmistakable and horrifying, was the calcified form of a child, perfectly preserved, turned to stone inside her body. But that wasn't what made the doctor's hand shake. It was the bullet lodged beside it. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The town of Grayson, West Virginia, had 847 souls, most of them elderly, most of them stubborn. It clung to the Appalachian mountainside like a memory refusing to fade. The coal mine had closed in 1985, taking the young people with it. What remained were weathered farmhouses, a white Baptist church with a leaning steeple, and folks who measured time in seasons and funerals. Eleanor Hutchins had lived her entire life within 5 miles of where she was born, her hands rough as tree bark. Told the story of 72 years, each callous a decade of work, each scar a season survived. Her silver hair, always pinned in a tight bun, had been that way since 1960, the year she married Harold. Harold Hutchins, dead now 6 months, come February, had been the only man she'd ever loved. They'd married when she was 18 and he was 20, fresh back from Korea with shadows in his eyes that never quite left. For 54 years, they'd shared a bed, a farm, and silences deeper than any conversation. Their daughter, Rebecca. She went by Dr. Mitchell now, always the full title. Never Becky anymore, had left Grayson the day after her divorce 12 years ago. Eleanor had told her the marriage was sacred, that a woman stood by her vows. Rebecca had looked at her mother with eyes full of hurt and said, "Like you stood by yours." They hadn't spoken since. Not really. Birthday cards with no messages, Christmas calls that lasted 3 minutes. Eleanor's farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained. The porch swing squeaked in the wind, a sound Harold had meant to fix for 30 years. His work boots still sat by the door, caked with dried mud from that last morning. She couldn't bring herself to move them. Instead, the walls held 54 years of marriage and photographs Harold in his army uniform, young and trying to smile. Their wedding day, Eleanor in her mother's dress, baby Rebecca, the only child they'd have, family Christmases, Harold's purple heart in a frame he'd kept in a drawer, never hung, the locked metal trunk in the bedroom closet, the one he'd never let her open. Pastor Thomas Whitfield had known Eleanor 40 years, since he'd arrived fresh from seminary, believing he could save this dying town. He'd buried her parents, baptized her grandchildren when Rebecca still brought them to visit. And 6 months ago, he'd lowered Harold into the red West Virginia clay. Now Eleanor sat in a hospital 90 miles away, and the doctor was staring at something inside her that defied explanation, something she'd carried in silence since before Rebecca was born, something that weighed 6 pounds but had crushed her for half a century. The hymnal hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Eleanor's knees buckled during the third verse of Amazing Grace, Harold's favorite, the one they'd sung at his funeral 6 months ago. The sanctuary of Grayson Baptist Church fell silent, except for the hymnal's pages fluttering against worn floorboards. Pastor Thomas Whitfield caught her before she crumpled completely, his strong hands gripping her elbows. She weighed nothing. He thought with alarm. When had she become so light, so fragile? "I'm fine," Eleanor whispered, though her face had gone the color of old newspaper. "Just need to sit." But she wasn't fine. Her hand pressed against her abdomen, fingers splayed across the loose fabric of her Sunday dress. The pain had been building for months, sharp, insistent, like something inside her was finally demanding to be acknowledged. Mrs. Henderson, 80 years old and the unofficial matriarch of Grayson, pushed through the small crowd gathering around Eleanor. "Child, you're white as a ghost. You need a hospital." "No." Eleanor's voice came out stronger than she felt. "No hospitals. Ellie," Pastor Thomas knelt beside the pew where they'd settled her. "You collapsed. This isn't the first time you've been unwell. I've seen you wince during services. I've watched you skip fellowship meals. How long has this been going on?" Eleanor's eyes found the stained glass window behind the altar, Jesus with his arms outstretched, forever welcoming, forever waiting. Harold had sat beside her in this pew for 40 years. The wood still held the impression of where he'd rested his hand. "Since Harold died," she said quietly. "Maybe longer. I don't know any more." That was a lie. She knew exactly when it had started. August 2nd, the night everything changed. The night the weight that had lived inside her for 52 years had first taken root. Pastor Thomas pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling Rebecca. Don't you dare." Eleanor's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "She's busy. She has patients, responsibilities. She needs to know her mother is sick." "I'm not her mother anymore. She made that clear." The pastor's expression softened. He'd officiated Rebecca's wedding, then her divorce. He'd watched the chasm open between mother and daughter, watched stubborn pride on both sides turn love into something cold and distant. "You're still her mother, Ellie, and she's still your daughter. Some things don't change, no matter how much silence sits between them." Eleanor closed her eyes. The pain in her abdomen pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. For 52 years, she'd carried this secret. For 52 years, she'd pressed her hand against her belly and felt the hard, unchanging mass beneath her skin. The doctors in 1902 had called it a tumor, had wanted to operate. She'd refused. Harold had held her hand and helped her refuse. Because it wasn't a tumor. They both knew what it was. "Call her," Eleanor said finally, her voice breaking. "But I won't go in an ambulance. That's how Harold left. I won't leave that way, too." The drive to Pittsburgh took 90 minutes in Pastor Thomas's pickup truck. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, her purse clutched in her lap, Inside the purse, wrapped in a handkerchief, was the sealed letter Harold had left her, written 2 days before he died, pressed into her hands by the hospice nurse with the words, "He said you'd know when to open it." She hadn't opened it, couldn't, because opening it would make his death real in a way the funeral hadn't, the way sleeping alone in their bed hadn't, the way eating breakfast in silence hadn't. The mountains rolled past the window, green and eternal. Eleanor pressed her palm against her abdomen again, feeling the familiar hardness, feeling her daughter, the one she'd lost, the one she'd never let go. "You keep touching your stomach," Pastor Thomas said gently, keeping his eyes on the winding road. "Old habit? Since when?" Eleanor watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting. "Since before Rebecca was born? Since I learned what it meant to carry something you can't put down." The pastor wanted to ask more. She could see the questions forming on his lips. But he was a good man, a patient man. He drove in silence, letting her gather whatever strength she had left. Pittsburgh Medical Center rose before them like a monument of glass and steel. Eleanor's breath caught. The last time she'd seen Harold, he'd been in a building like this. She'd held his hand as the morphine took him somewhere she couldn't follow. Now it was her turn to face what she'd been running from for half a century. Doctor Rebecca Mitchell stood in the doorway of examination room 7, her hand frozen on the handle. 12 years since she'd seen her mother's face outside of the Christmas card photo Eleanor still sent like clockwork, always showing the farmhouse, never showing herself. Eleanor sat on the examination table, small and fragile in a hospital gown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders for the first time Rebecca could remember. She looked old. When had her mother become old? "Hello, and Mother," Rebecca said, her voice professional, clinical, a shield. "Rebecca." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. Not Becky, never Becky anymore. Pastor Thomas stood beside Eleanor like a buffer, his presence the only thing keeping the tension from combusting. "Now's not the time for old wounds," he said quietly. Rebecca stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She was 48, an OB-GYN with 20 years of experience, chief of her department. She'd delivered over 3,000 babies. She knew the human body intimately, but standing before her mother, she felt 16 again, inadequate and misunderstood. "Tell me about the pain," Rebecca said, pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. Eleanor recited symptoms like a grocery list: abdominal pain, nausea, difficulty eating, weight loss. All the things Rebecca had learned in medical school to recognize as red flags. "How long?" "6 months, since your father died." Rebecca's jaw tightened at the mention of him. She gestured to the examination table. "I need to examine you." Eleanor lay back, and Rebecca placed her hands on her mother's abdomen. Professional, detached, palpating the upper quadrants, then lower. Her fingers found the mass immediately hard, defined, unmistakable. Years of training told her what it was. Logic told her what it couldn't be. She pressed again, different angle. The mass didn't move, didn't shift. It was fixed, integrated into the abdominal wall as if it had been there for Rebecca's hand stopped moving. "Mom?" The word slipped out, the professional mask cracking. "How long have you had this mass?" Eleanor's eyes were closed, tears leaking from the corners. "I told you, 6 months. Don't lie to me. Not now. This didn't grow in 6 months. Rebecca's voice rose despite herself. This has been here for years, decades. Eleanor opened her eyes, and in them, Rebecca saw something she'd never seen in her stoic, unshakable mother fear. I need to do an ultrasound, Rebecca said. Now, the ultrasound room was dim, the only light coming from the monitor. Rebecca squeezed gel onto her mother's abdomen with shaking hands, professional composure dissolving with each passing second. She pressed the transducer against skin, angling it, searching. The image that appeared on the screen made her breath stop. The mass was large, well-defined, with clear borders. But it was the internal structure that made Rebecca's mind rebel against what her eyes were seeing. Skeletal architecture, unmistakable, impossible. The transducer slipped from her hand, clattering against the examination table. "Oh, my God," she whispered. Eleanor didn't move, didn't ask what Rebecca saw. She already knew. "Mom," Rebecca's voice cracked, "when were you last pregnant?" The silence stretched like a chasm. 2. Eleanor finally said, "You were 2 years old." And Rebecca did the math automatically. 52 years. 52 years. It wasn't medically possible. Couldn't be possible. And yet the image on the screen showed. She forced herself to pick up the transducer again, hands trembling, methodical now, measuring. The fetal form was curled, approximately 7 months gestation in size, but instead of soft tissue, the image showed bright white calcification, bone, calcium deposits. The body had turned the fetus to stone. "Lithopedion," Rebecca breathed. "A stone baby." She'd read about it in medical school, a case study from the 1800s. A medical curiosity so rare that fewer than 300 cases had ever been documented. When a fetus dies in an ectopic pregnancy or in the abdomen, the body sometimes can't expel it. So it calcifies it instead, turning it to stone to protect the mother from infection. But 52 years. No one carried a lithopedion for 52 years. The longest documented case was Rebecca's thoughts fractured as she moved the transducer lower. And something else appeared on the screen. Something small, metallic, bright white against the gray tissue. She zoomed in, her medical training screaming impossible, even as her eyes confirmed what she was seeing. A bullet. "Mom," Rebecca's voice came out strangled. Is that a bullet?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. Rebecca pulled back, staring at her mother with new eyes. The emergency call from the pastor, the collapse at church, the decades of silence, the distance between them that had always felt like more than just disapproval of a divorce. "Dr. Richardson," Rebecca said into the phone, her voice mechanically calm. "I need you in ultrasound room 3 immediately." And she looked at her mother. This woman she thought she knew. This woman who had carried a calcified fetus and a bullet inside her body for over half a century. "Why didn't you tell anyone, even Dad?" Eleanor met her daughter's eyes. "Your father knew? He's the only one who knew?" "What?" "He knew everything, Rebecca. The baby, the bullet, all of it." "Doctor." Richardson burst through the door. "What's the emergency?" Rebecca gestured to the screen. Unable to form words, Richardson stared at the image, stared at Eleanor, stared back at the screen. "Mrs. Hutchins," he said slowly, "is that a bullet?" The CT scan took 40 minutes. Eleanor lay perfectly still inside the machine's white tunnel, the mechanical whirring surrounding her like the sound of time itself grinding forward. She kept her eyes closed and thought of Harold, always Harold. In the conference room 3 floors up, 7 specialists gathered around a large monitor. Dr. James Richardson, chief of surgery, pointed to the images with the end of his pen, his military bearing evident in the precise way he moved. "The lithopedion is confirmed," he said. "Female fetus, approximately 28 weeks gestation at time of death, fully calcified, weight estimated at 6.2 pounds of calcium deposits." He paused, clicking to the next image. "But this is what concerns me." The bullet appeared on the screen, bright white against the gray tissue. Ah, 45 caliber round, embedded deep in the calcified mass near where the fetal spine would have been. "The trajectory is wrong," Richardson said quietly. He'd been a military surgeon in the Gulf War. He knew bullet wounds. "This didn't come from the front. Entry angle suggests the shot came from behind. Downward trajectory, approximately 30 to 45 degrees. Rebecca sat at the conference table, her professional composure barely holding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this wasn't self-inflicted, and it wasn't an accident." Richardson's eyes were serious. "Someone shot your mother, Dr. Mitchell, execution style." The room fell silent. "We need to call the police," one of the other doctors said. "It happened in 1972. Rebecca said hollowly, 52 years ago, the statute of limitations." "There's no statute of limitations on attempted murder," Richardson interrupted. "But first, we need to stabilize your mother. This mass is pressing on multiple organs. The pain she's experiencing will only get worse. We need to operate." Rebecca found Eleanor in the recovery area, sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the Pittsburgh skyline. Pastor Thomas had gone to find coffee, leaving them alone for the first time in 12 years. "Tell me," Rebecca said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Tell me everything." Eleanor's hands twisted the hospital blanket. "What did the doctor say? That someone shot you? That you've been carrying a dead baby and a bullet for 52 years? That you need surgery immediately or you'll die?" Rebecca's voice broke. "Mom, please, no more secrets." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, remembering. "It happened in August, 19. You were 2 years old, sleeping in your crib. Your father had been home from Korea for 19 years, but he never really came home. Not all of him. He had nightmares, terrible nightmares. He'd wake up screaming in Korean, words I didn't understand." She paused, gathering strength. "That night, I was 5 months pregnant. We were so happy. We'd wanted another baby for so long. Harold was getting better, or so I thought. He'd stopped drinking, started sleeping through some nights. But then he came home that evening, and I knew something was wrong. He was shaking, said he'd seen his old commanding officer, Major Edmund Walsh." Rebecca leaned forward. "What happened?" "Harold told me Walsh had done terrible things in Korea, war crimes, that Harold had witnessed it all. There was a village, a girl. She was pregnant, just like me. Walsh had ordered Harold to—" Eleanor's voice failed. She pressed her hand against her mouth. "He ordered him to execute her." She continued after a moment. "A child, a pregnant child. Harold refused. There was a confrontation. Walsh shot the girl anyway. The bullet went through her, hit Harold in the shoulder. She died, her baby died. Harold carried that guilt for 19 years. Rebecca felt sick. And Major Walsh came to our house that night, said Harold had been talking to reporters, asking questions, threatening to expose what happened in Korea. Walsh said if Harold didn't stop, there would be consequences. Eleanor's eyes were far away. I heard them arguing, came downstairs. Walsh turned, saw me, saw I was pregnant. He said, just like that Korean bitch. Then he pulled his gun. The hospital room was silent except for the beep of monitors. Harold fought him. They struggled. The gun went off. Eleanor's hand moved to her abdomen. I felt it. Felt the bullet tear through me. Felt it hit her. My baby. I knew she was dead before I hit the floor. Why didn't you go to the hospital? Rebecca's voice was anguished. Walsh stood over me, told Harold if we reported it, he'd kill you, kill our baby daughter sleeping upstairs. Said he had friends in the police, friends everywhere. No one would believe us. It would look like a domestic dispute. Harold would go to prison. You'd go to foster care. Eleanor met her daughter's eyes. So Harold told me it was him, told me he'd been drinking, that his gun went off accidentally, made me promise to say it was an accident if anyone asked. But you lost the baby. You must have needed medical care. I delivered her at home 3 days later, stillborn, perfect, beautiful. We wrapped her in a blanket. Harold wanted to bury her in the cemetery, but I couldn't let go. I kept her with me. My body wouldn't let her go either. The doctors later said it was a miracle. I didn't die of infection. But my body built a tomb for her instead. Calcium, stone, a memorial I'd carry forever. Rebecca was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. And Dad just let you. He was protecting me, protecting you. Sid Walsh was powerful, connected. Harold tried to report it once. In 1970, military police came to the house, questioned me. I lied, said I'd never been pregnant, said Harold was suffering from PTSD delusions. They left. Walsh sent flowers the next day with a note, "Smart choice." Where's Walsh now? Dead. 88. Lung cancer. Decorated veteran. Silver Star. They gave him a hero's funeral. Eleanor's voice was bitter. Harold kept all the evidence. Everything. Witness statements from other soldiers, documents, photos, hidden in a trunk in our bedroom, waiting for Walsh to die so he could finally tell the truth without putting us in danger. But he never did. He tried. After Walsh died, Harold went to the VA. They told him the statute of limitations had passed. The witnesses were dead or couldn't be found. The case was closed before it ever opened. Eleanor's shoulders sagged. So he kept carrying it, just like I kept carrying her. Rebecca stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is insane. 52 years of lies, of pain, of silence. Did you ever think about what this did to us, to me? Growing up with a mother who was emotionally absent, a father who drank himself to sleep every night, I thought you didn't love me. I thought I was the problem. You were never the problem. Eleanor's voice broke. You were the reason we survived, the reason we kept going. Every time I looked at you, I remembered why we stayed silent, why we protected Walsh's secret. Because keeping you safe was worth more than justice. But I wasn't safe. I grew up in a house full of ghosts, full of secrets. You were so distant, Mom, so cold. I thought you hated me. I was terrified, Eleanor whispered. Terrified you'd find out. Terrified you'd hate us. Terrified Walsh's people would come back. Every day I woke up and put my hand on my belly and felt her there, my daughter who never breathed, and I had to pretend everything was normal. Had to smile and cook dinner and go to church and act like I wasn't carrying death inside me. Rebecca sank back into the chair, her anger deflating into something more complicated, understanding, maybe, or just exhaustion. When I got divorced, Rebecca said quietly, you told me marriage was sacred. That I should have tried harder. I thought you were judging me, but you were just trying to protect me, weren't you? From the kind of pain you'd endured, I didn't want you to give up on something fixable. Your husband, he wasn't a bad man, just distant, workaholic. But he wasn't violent, wasn't dangerous. I thought if you left him for those reasons, you'd regret it. Because I'd stayed with Harold through much worse, and I never regretted it. But your situations weren't the same. I know that now. But then all I could see was my daughter walking away from her marriage, and I was terrified. Terrified you'd end up alone like I was about to be. Harold was already sick. I knew I was losing him, and I'd already lost you. The machines beeped steadily. Outside, evening was falling over Pittsburgh, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I found something in Dad's belongings, Rebecca said, after he died. The hospice nurse gave it to me, a letter, sealed, addressed to you. Did you ever open it? Eleanor's hand went to her purse on the bedside table. She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and handling. I couldn't. If I opened it, it would mean he was really gone. Maybe it's time. Eleanor's hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Harold's shaky handwriting filling both sides. She read silently, tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. When she finished, she handed it to Rebecca without a word. Rebecca read, My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time you knew the whole truth. I've carried this life for 52 years, and I won't let it follow me to the grave. I didn't shoot you, not drunk, not by accident. Major Edmund Walsh shot you because you walked in when I told him I was going to expose what he did in Korea, what he made us all do. There was a girl, Kim Soo-jin, 13 years old, pregnant. The North Korean soldiers had raped her, left her with child. Walsh said she was enemy bloodline, said we had to make an example. Ordered me to execute her. I refused. He pulled his gun on me. Soo-jin stepped between us, tried to protect me. Walsh shot her anyway. The bullet went through her belly, through her baby, and hit my shoulder. I watched her die, watched them die, her and her unborn child, 20 years later. When you were pregnant with our second child, when you looked so much like Soo-jin, Walsh came to silence me. He shot you the same way he shot her, through the belly, trying to kill you and our daughter both. I told you it was me because he threatened to kill Rebecca. Our baby girl sleeping upstairs. I couldn't let that happen. I'd already failed to save Soo-jin. I wouldn't fail to save you. I spent 52 years keeping you safe from the truth, 52 years watching you carry our daughter Grace inside you, turned to stone, a memorial to my failure. You carried her, I carried the guilt. The evidence is in the trunk. Everything Walsh did, everyone he killed, 17 war crimes, 47 civilians, all documented. I wanted to release it when he died, but by then you'd carried Grace so long I didn't want to make you relive the trauma. Forgive me for the lies. Forgive me for letting you suffer. Forgive me for not being strong enough to tell you the truth while I still had time. You named her Grace in your heart. I know you did. I heard you whisper to her at night. When you thought I was sleeping, she was Grace for both of us. Proof that even in death, love persists. Tell the truth now. Ellie, let Grace rest. Let me rest. Let yourself finally be free. I love and will love you. I've always loved you. In this life, and whatever comes after. Harold. Rebecca lowered the letter, her vision blurred with the tears. Mom. Eleanor was sobbing. 52 years of grief finally breaking through. Rebecca climbed onto the hospital bed, holding her mother for the first time since she was a child. He protected me. Eleanor wept. All this time, he protected me, and you protected him. You both protected each other, and it destroyed you both. They held each other as the evening deepened into night. Outside, the city lights flickered on, and somewhere in the hospital, Dr. Richardson was reviewing surgical plans for the morning. Finally, Eleanor pulled back, wiping her eyes. There's a trunk at the house. Pastor Thomas can get it. Everything Harold mentioned, it's all there. We'll get it we'll expose everything, clear Dad's name, get justice for Sujin, for Grace, for you. Eleanor touched her daughter's face, really seeing her for the first time in years. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed. You were the mother you could be. That's all anyone can be. I need the surgery, don't I? Rebecca nodded. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Richardson is the best. He was a military surgeon. He understands. I'm scared, I know, but I'll be there, and Dad will be there, and Grace. Rebecca placed her hand over her mother's abdomen. She'll finally be free. You'll both be free. The pre-op room was cold and sterile at 6 in the morning. Eleanor lay on the gurney in a thin hospital gown, an IV line already threading into the back of her hand. She hadn't slept, neither had Rebecca, who sat beside her in wrinkled scrubs, still wearing yesterday's makeup smeared from crying. Pastor Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, his worn Bible open in his hands. He'd been reading Psalms. But Eleanor wasn't listening to the words anymore. She was listening to the sound of her own heartbeat on the monitor, counting each one like a countdown. If I don't wake up, Eleanor said quietly. Mom, don't listen. Eleanor's grip tightened on Rebecca's hand. If I don't wake up, I need you to do something. Rebecca's eyes were already red. Anything. Find Sujin's family in Korea. The village was called Ocheonri. Harold wrote it down in his documents. Tell them. Her voice cracked. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them we never forgot her. Rebecca nodded, tears spilling over. I will. I promise. Eleanor turned to Pastor Thomas. Bury me next to Harold, and bury her too. She placed her hand over her abdomen. Grace. I want her to have a name on a headstone. Grace Hutchins, 1970. I want people to know she existed. The pastor's eyes were wet. She'll have the service she deserves. You both will. I want her to be gentle with her, Eleanor said, looking at Rebecca. When they take her out, tell Dr. Richardson to be gentle. She's been with me so long. He will be, I promise. The door opened and Dr. Richardson entered, already in surgical scrubs, his dog tags visible at his neck. Behind him came the anesthesiologist, Dr. Sarah Chen. pushing a cart of equipment. "We're ready." "Eleanor," Richardson said. His voice was kind but professional. "The surgery will take approximately 3 to 4 hours. We'll make a vertical incision here." He gestured to her abdomen. "Remove the lithopedion intact if possible. The bullet is lodged near the calcified spine. We'll extract it carefully." Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Richardson sat on the edge of the gurney, his military bearing softening. "I've been a surgeon for 30 years. I was in Desert Storm, saw combat wounds. I know what a bullet trajectory looks like. Eleanor, I know this wasn't an accident." Eleanor met his eyes. "I know you know. The police will want to talk to you when you're recovered. I have evidence, documents. My daughter knows where they are." Richardson nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure you survive to tell the story. Both stories, Bolds, yours and Harold's." Rebecca stood, pulling something from her bag. "Harold's letter, now in a plastic sleeve. Can she take this into surgery? Is that allowed?" Chen smiled gently. "We'll keep it with her belongings, right next to the operating table." "I need to see her," Eleanor said suddenly. "After you take her out. Before anything else, I need to see Grace. We'll preserve her carefully," Richardson promised. "You'll have time with her, as much as you need." The orderlies came to wheel the gurney. This was it. The moment Eleanor had been avoiding for 52 years. Letting go. Rebecca walked alongside the gurney, holding her mother's hand. They stopped outside the operating room doors, the boundary Rebecca couldn't cross. "Mom?" Rebecca's voice broke completely. "I love you. I should have said it more. I should have said it every day." Eleanor reached up, touching her daughter's face. "I love you too, baby girl. I'm sorry I made you feel like I didn't. I'm sorry for all the years I was too broken to show you." They were both crying now. 12 years of silence breaking like a dam. "You're going to wake up," Rebecca said fiercely. "You're going to wake up. And we're going to have time, real time. No more secrets. No more silence. No more secrets," Eleanor whispered. The doors swung open. Eleanor was wheeled inside. The last thing she saw before they closed was Rebecca's face. And for the first time in decades, Eleanor felt something besides grief. She felt hope. The operating room was brilliant white, almost blinding. Eleanor counted 8 people in surgical masks, their eyes the only human part visible. Machines surrounded her, beeping and whirring. The anesthesia mask lowered toward her face. "Count backwards from 10, Chen said softly. 10? Eleanor whispered. 9, 8. Grace. 7. Harold. Said. The world went dark. Richardson made the first incision at 6:47 a.m., a vertical cut from just below Eleanor's sternum to her pubic bone. The scalpel moved with practiced precision, parting skin, then subcutaneous tissue, then muscle, more suction, he said quietly. The surgical resident assisting him, Dr. Marcus Webb, 28 years old, and seeing his first lithopedion, leaned closer. I've never seen calcification like this. Few people here to have. Richardson worked carefully, his hands steady despite the extraordinary nature of what he was uncovering. There are less than 300 documented cases in medical history. and none that I know of carried this long. The calcified mass became visible, white and hard, integrated into Eleanor's abdominal wall in ways the CT scan hadn't fully revealed. Blood vessels had grown around it over decades, the body treating it like an organ rather than a foreign object. Her body protected it, Richardson murmured. Built a blood supply to keep the area viable. Incredible. 30 minutes in, complications began. BP dropping, the anesthesiologist announced. 90/60. I see it. Richardson's hands didn't stop moving. The calcification has adhered to the abdominal wall more extensively than expected. Separating it is causing more bleeding than anticipated. She's down to 85/55. Start a transfusion. Type and cross-match. Qua, we need 2 units standing by. The surgical team moved in coordinated silence, each person performing their role with efficiency born of years of practice. But there was tension in the room now. This was becoming more complicated than anyone had anticipated. An hour in, Richardson reached the bullet. It was lodged exactly where the scans had shown, embedded in what had once been the fetal spine, now calcified solid as bone. The angle was unmistakable to his trained eye, downward from behind, approximately 40 degrees, an execution shot that had failed to kill. Forceps, he said quietly. The bullet came free with gentle pressure, a .4 caliber round, partially flattened from impact with bone. Richardson placed it carefully in a specimen container. Evidence. After 52 years, evidence. I've got the calcified mass free, he said. Beginning extraction. This was the moment that would appear in medical journals, that would be studied by students for decades. The lithopedion emerged intact, a hard white mass roughly the size and shape of a 7-month fetus curled in fetal position. A nurse gasped softly. She's beautiful, Richardson said quietly. And he meant it. The calcium had preserved every detail. Tiny fingers curled near a face in perfect repose. The umbilical cord, calcified into a white rope, every bone visible through the calcium shell. Weight, he asked. 6.2 pounds. Richardson placed Grace carefully in a sterile basin. Handle her gently. The mother wants to see her. BP stabilizing, the anesthesiologist announced. 90/65. Richardson allowed himself a moment of relief. Then he returned to the wound, checking for bleeding, ensuring no damage to surrounding organs. Everything looked good, clean, successful. Then the monitor shrieked. Fib, the anesthesiologist shouted. She's in cardiac arrest. Everything happened at once. Crash cart rolled in, internal defibrillator paddles. The surgical team stepped back. Clear. Sir Richardson's hands were on Eleanor's exposed heart, feeling it quiver uselessly. Charged to 200. The shock made Eleanor's body jerk on the table. Nothing. The monitor showed only chaos. Epi, 1 milligram. Continue compressions. Dictor. Webb's hands were on Eleanor's chest, pushing hard, rhythmic. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clear. Another shock. Still nothing. Outside the operating room, Rebecca heard the code blue announcement over the hospital intercom. She knew. Somehow she knew it was her mother. She ran toward the OR, security trying to intercept her. That's my mom. That's my mother. Pastor Thomas caught her, held her as she struggled. Pray with me. Rebecca, pray. Inside the OR, 2 minutes of cardiac arrest. 3 minutes. Brain damage became more likely with each passing second. Come on, Eleanor, Richardson muttered, shocking her again. You survived 52 years of this? Don't quit now. 4 minutes. Richardson looked at the anesthesiologist, saw the expression that meant they were approaching the point of no return. In 30 seconds, he'd have to make the call to keep trying or to call time of death. "One more," he said. "One more time. Charge to 300. The paddles touched Eleanor's heart. Clear. The shock delivered. For a moment, nothing. The monitor continued its chaotic dance. Then a blip, a single heartbeat, another. "We have sinus rhythm," Dr. Chen called out. "BP coming up. 70 over 40. 80 over 50. The room exhaled collectively. 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Eleanor had been clinically dead for 5 minutes and 12 seconds. "Let's close her up," Richardson said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "Fast, but careful. I want her in ICU in 20 minutes. The closure took 40 minutes, every stitch placed with care. When they finally wheeled Eleanor to the ICU, Richardson pulled off his mask and went to find Rebecca. She was in the waiting room, Pastor Thomas beside her, both on their knees in prayer. They looked up when he entered. "She's alive," he said simply. Rebecca's face crumpled, but she coded cardiac arrest during surgery. "We got her back, but she was down for over 5 minutes. The next 48 hours are critical. She may not wake up. If she does, there may be deficits. Brain damage. We won't know the extent until—" "Can I see her?" Richardson nodded. "She's sedated, on a ventilator. But yes, come with me." The ICU room was dim, filled with the sound of machines breathing for Eleanor, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath the machine pushed into her lungs. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires making her seem more machine than human. Rebecca approached slowly, as if afraid to startle her. She took her mother's hand, so small and cold. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm here. I read Dad's letter. I know everything. I forgive you. I forgive both of you." Her voice broke. "Please wake up. We have so much time to make up for. Please." The ventilator hissed. The monitors beeped. Eleanor didn't move. "She's stable for now," Richardson said from the doorway. "That's all we can ask for." "Grace," Rebecca asked, The lithopedion in pathology, preserved carefully as promised. When your mother wakes up, she can see her." "If she wakes up," Rebecca thought, but didn't say. She pulled a chair to her mother's bedside and sat. Pastor Thomas brought coffee. The hours began their slow crawl. Outside, dawn broke over Pittsburgh, the sun rising on a day Eleanor might never see. Rebecca held her mother's hand and waited. Day 2. Eleanor's vitals wavered like a candle in wind. The monitors showed a heartbeat that stumbled, recovered, stumbled again. Her kidneys were struggling, the numbers climbing in ways that made the nurses exchange worried glances. Infection markers rising, the specter of sepsis haunted the ICU room. Dr. Richardson stood at the foot of Eleanor's bed, studying her chart with the intensity of a man reading his own failure. Rebecca sat in the same chair she'd occupied for 36 hours, still in yesterday's scrubs, her hair unwashed, her eyes hollowed out from lack of sleep. "Her body has been compensating for 52 years, Richardson said quietly. "The lithopedion became part of her physiology. Blood vessels grew around it. Her abdominal muscles accommodated it. Her organs shifted to make room. Now that it's gone, her system is in shock. It's like her body doesn't know how to function without it. "What are you saying?" Rebecca's voice was hoarse from disuse and crying. "I'm saying we've done everything medically possible. We've stabilized the bleeding, managed the infection as best we can. But her body," he paused, choosing words carefully, "her body is shutting down, not all at once, but gradually, like a house where someone's turning off the lights, room by room." "Give me odds." Richardson met her eyes. 40%, maybe less. With the cardiac arrest factored in, her age, the trauma to her system, I'd say 30% survival. And if she does survive, there's a significant chance of neurological damage from the time her brain was without oxygen. Rebecca's hand tightened on her mother's. The skin was so thin she could see every vein, every bone. When had her mother become so fragile? Or had she always been this fragile, just hidden beneath layers of stoic silence? The church prayer chain had mobilized. 200 people in Grayson and surrounding towns were praying. They'd organized shifts, 24-hour prayer coverage. But Ms. Henderson, 82 years old, had driven herself to Pittsburgh and was camped in the hospital chapel, refusing to leave until Eleanor woke up. The media had gotten wind of the story. Not the full story, not yet, but enough. "Woman carries stone baby for 52 years was trending on social media. Medical journals were calling. The hospital had posted security outside Eleanor's room to keep reporters away. Rebecca had made calls to other specialists, begging for second opinions, for miracle cures, for anything. They all said the same thing her medical training already told her: wait and see. On the afternoon of day 2, Rebecca asked to see Grace. The pathology lab was in the basement, cold and clinical. Dr. Richardson had arranged for privacy. Grace rested in a clear preservation container, suspended in solution that would keep the calcium from degrading. Rebecca stood before her sister for the first time. The calcification had preserved every detail with heartbreaking clarity. Tiny fingers, no bigger than matchsticks, toes curled, a face in peaceful repose as if merely sleeping, the umbilical cord, white as bone, still attached. She was perfect, perfectly preserved, perfectly dead. "Hi, little sister," Rebecca whispered, her palm against the glass. "I'm Rebecca. I'm your big sister. I'm sorry I never knew you. I'm sorry Mom carried you alone for so long." She stood there for 20 minutes, just looking, memorizing. This was her sister, her blood, the baby who had died so Eleanor and Rebecca could live. "Mom called you Grace," Rebecca said, "because you were grace to her, evidence that love could survive anything, even death." She wiped her eyes. "I'm going to make sure people know about you, not as a medical curiosity, as a person, as Grace Hutchins, who existed, who mattered, who was loved." The bullet sat in a separate container nearby. Evidence now. Rebecca had called the police that morning. Detectives were coming tomorrow to take a statement. If Eleanor survived to give one, Rebecca had spent the previous evening going through the trunk Pastor Thomas had retrieved from Eleanor's house. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of villages burned, lists of civilian casualties. witness statements from other soldiers, all detailing atrocities committed by Major Edmund Walsh. 17 separate incidents, 47 dead civilians, and one faded photograph, a young Korean girl, maybe 13, with a slight swell to her belly, on the back, in Harold's handwriting. Kim Soo-jin, never forgotten, November 12th, 52. The day she died, Rebecca had contacted the State Department, the Korean Embassy, the Veterans Affairs Office. She'd started the process of finding Soo-jin's family, of clearing Harold's name, of ensuring Walsh's decorated legacy was destroyed by the truth. But first, Eleanor had to live. August 20th a.m. Rebecca jerked awake in her chair to the sound of alarms. Eleanor's monitors were screaming. Nurses rushed in. Code Blue announced overhead, "She's crashing." A nurse's voice, "Urgent." Beat 60/30 and dropping, heart rate erratic. The crash team arrived within 90 seconds. Rebecca was pushed back against the wall, forced to watch as they worked on her mother for the second time in 3 days. Richardson appeared, still in the clothes he had been wearing when he left 6 hours ago. He must have been sleeping in his office. "What's the situation, Respiratory failure, BP critical." "She's not responding." They worked. 10 minutes. 15. The ventilator breathed for Eleanor's body, but her heart was giving up. Beat by struggling beat. Richardson turned to Rebecca. His face said everything. "Becky." He rarely used her nickname. "Your mother didn't sign a DNR. You're her medical proxy. We need to talk about—" "Keep going," Rebecca said. "She's been down for almost 20 minutes. Even if we get her back, keep going." But Richardson was already shaking his head. He'd seen this before, the body giving up. The moment when medicine stopped being enough. "Rebecca," his voice was gentle. Is this what she'd want? Being kept alive by machines after everything she endured, everything she survived. Would she want this? Rebecca looked at her mother, at the tubes and wires, at the machines doing the work her body couldn't. She remembered Eleanor's words before surgery. "If I don't wake up." She'd been preparing them, preparing Rebecca, because Eleanor had known her body might not survive having Grace removed. They'd been one being for so long that separating them might be fatal. "Stop," Rebecca whispered. The team hesitated. I said stop, louder now. "Stop CP, stop interventions. Let her go." Richardson nodded to the team. They stepped back. The frantic activity ceased. Only the ventilator continued. Only the monitors kept beeping their diminishing rhythm. Rebecca climbed onto the bed, careful of the wires, and held her mother. "It's okay. Mom, Dad's waiting. Grace is waiting. You can go. You can finally rest." Pastor Thomas appeared in the doorway. Summoned by some instinct, he began reading last rites, his voice steady despite his tears. Rebecca sang, her voice cracking, the lullaby Eleanor used to sing when Rebecca was small, the only tender memory she had from childhood. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Eleanor's heart rate slowed on the monitor. 70, 60, 50. That saved a wretch like me. 40, 30. I once was lost, but now am found. 20, 15. Was blind, but now I see. 10, 5. The monitor showed Eleanor's final heartbeats. Irregular, weakening. 3, tubes. And then Eleanor Hutchins gasped. Her eyes flew open. The monitor stuttered, then caught a heartbeat, strong. Then another. Mom. Rebecca pulled back, staring. Eleanor's eyes focused on her daughter's face. Her lip moved around the ventilator tube. She was trying to speak. "Get the tube out," Richardson ordered, already moving. "She's breathing on her own. She's breathing." They extubated her quickly. Eleanor coughed, gasped, drew in air with her own lungs. "Grace," she whispered. Her first word. "I saw her. I saw Grace." Rebecca was crying, laughing, holding her mother's face. "You're alive. You're alive." "I saw her," Eleanor repeated, her voice stronger. "She was with Harold. They were together. And the girl, Sujin, she was there too. They were all waiting." "Mom, you're not making sense. You need to rest." "No." Eleanor gripped Rebecca's hand with surprising strength. "Listen, Harold spoke to me. He said, 'Not yet. You have to tell them the truth. All of it. Clear my name. Clear Sujin's name.' That's why I came back. To finish it." The medical team stood frozen, watching something that shouldn't be happening. Spontaneous recovery after 20 minutes of code. After her heart had essentially stopped. After her body had been shutting down for 2 days. "This isn't possible," a nurse whispered. But Richardson had been in war. He'd seen things medicine couldn't explain. Soldiers who survived wounds that should have killed them. Men who lived when they should have died. Because they had unfinished business. "Run full labs," he ordered. "Check everything. But I think—" He looked at Eleanor, at her eyes clear and focused for the first time since surgery. "I think she's going to be fine." By morning, Eleanor's vitals had stabilized to kidney function improving, infection markers dropping, every number trending in the right direction. The nurses called it a miracle. Richardson called it unexplained spontaneous recovery. Pastor Thomas called it answered prayer. Rebecca called it what it was, her mother's stubborn refusal to die with her story untold. Sanjite. Eleanor, that propped against pillows, the ventilator gone, breathing on her own for the first time in days. 3 days post-surgery, and she looked more alive than she had in months. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her eyes, which had been dim and distant for so long, held a clarity that startled everyone who saw her. Dr. Richardson stood at the foot of her bed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your kidney function is normal. Infection markers almost gone, heart rhythm stable. Neurologically, you're perfect. No deficits from the cardiac arrest. Mrs. Hutchins, I don't know how to explain this medically." "Maybe you don't need to," Eleanor said quietly. "Maybe some things don't need explanation." The room had been set up for a formal recording. Rebecca had arranged everything. A police detective sat in one corner, recording device running. Pastor Thomas stood as witness. Dr. Richardson remained as medical witness. And a military investigator from the Army Criminal Investigation Command had arrived that morning, having driven through the night from Washington. "Are you ready, Mom?" Rebecca asked gently. Eleanor nodded. She'd asked for something first. "I need to see her, Grace. Before I tell the story, I need to see her." They'd brought the preservation container to her room, placed it on a table where Eleanor could see Grace, perfect and white, suspended in solution. Eleanor stared at her daughter for a long moment, tears streaming silently down her face. "Hello, baby girl," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to let you go." She turned to the detective. "I'm ready now." Eleanor's testimony took 2 hours. She spoke clearly, chronologically, sparing no detail. The detective stopped her periodically to clarify, to ask questions, but mostly he just listened. She started with Harold's deployment to Korea in 1951, his letters home, growing darker, more troubled. His return in 1953, a different man. The nightmares, the drinking, the silences. "He never told me about Sujin at first," Eleanor said. "Not for years. The nightmares were always the same." Though a girl, too pregnant, screaming. He'd wake up shouting no in Korean. It took me years to get him to tell me why. She described the incident as Harold had finally revealed it to her in 1971 during a particularly bad episode. The village of Ocheon-ri, the search for weapons, Major Edmund Walsh's rage at finding nothing, the order to execute Sujin as an example. "Harold refused," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "Walsh pulled his weapon. Sujin stepped between them. 13 years old, pregnant, trying to protect an American soldier she'd just met. Walsh shot her anyway. Through the abdomen. The bullet went through her baby, and hit Harold's shoulder." The military investigator leaned forward. "Did Private Hutchins report this?" "He tried immediately. His commanding officer, not Walsh, the one above Walsh, told him to keep quiet, said it was war, said civilian casualties happened, said if Harold pushed it, he'd be court-martialed for cowardice, for refusing a direct order." Eleanor pulled out documents from the trunk, now organized in labeled folders. Harold kept everything. Witness statements from 3 other soldiers who saw what happened. Medical records showing his gunshot wound came from behind, not from enemy fire like the official report stated. Letters he wrote to his congressman that were never answered. Can she pass them to the investigator, who began reading with increasing intensity. In 1972, 19 years after Korea, Harold decided he couldn't live with the silence anymore. He'd gotten sober, started sleeping better. We were happy. I was pregnant with our second child. Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, to the long scar hidden beneath her hospital gown. "What happened?" the detective asked. Harold went to a reporter, a journalist in Pittsburgh who specialized in military stories, started telling him about Ocheon-ri, about Sujin, about Walsh. The reporter was interested, started investigating him, and Walsh found out. Eleanor described the night of August 17th, 72 with the precision of someone who'd relived it 10,000 times. Walsh arriving at their farmhouse. The argument. Harold saying he wouldn't stop, wouldn't be silenced anymore. Walsh's threats against Rebecca, their 2-year-old daughter, sleeping upstairs. "I heard them from upstairs, came down. Walsh was holding a gun. When he saw me, saw I was pregnant, he said," her voice caught, "he said, just like that Korean bitch. Then he shot me." The room was absolutely silent. Harold fought him, tried to get the gun away. I was on the floor bleeding. I could feel it, feel the bullet inside me, feel my baby dying. Harold got the gun away from Walsh, but Walsh threatened to kill Rebecca if we reported it, said he had connections, friends in law enforcement, that no one would believe us. It would look like a domestic dispute. Harold would go to prison. So, you lied, the detective said quietly. Harold lied, told me to say it was him, that he'd been drinking, his gun went off accidentally, told me to say I'd never been pregnant. Eleanor met the detective's eyes. I was 20 years old, bleeding, terrified. My husband was begging me to lie to protect our daughter, so I did. She described the miscarriage 3 days later, delivering Grace at home, stillborn, perfect. Harold wrapping her in a blanket, wanting to bury her. Eleanor refusing to let go. I kept her with me, in my body. I know it sounds insane-ish, but she was all I had left. Harold was so broken by guilt. Rebecca was too young to understand. Grace was mine, the only thing that was completely mine. Doctor at Richardson spoke up. The calcification process would have begun within weeks of the fetal death. Your body, recognizing it, couldn't expel the remains, built a calcium shell around it to prevent infection. Over decades, the calcification became complete. You essentially turned your daughter into a memorial you'd carry forever. Eleanor nodded. I knew she was there. I felt her every day, put my hand on my belly every morning, said good morning to her, told her I loved her for 52 years. The military investigator had been reading through Harold's documents. Now he looked up, his face grave. Mrs. Hutchins, this is extensive. 17 separate incidents attributed to Major Walsh. Witness statements from 12 different soldiers, photographs, official reports that don't match the witness accounts. He pulled out one photograph. Sue Jin, young and frightened, her pregnancy barely visible. This is evidence of war crimes, multiple war crimes. Why didn't your husband release this after Walsh died in 1998? Eleanor's voice was thick with grief. He tried. Went to the VA, to Army CID, to his congressman. They told him the statute of limitations had passed, that most of the witnesses were dead, that Walsh was a decorated veteran, and reopening the case would damage military morale. They buried it. So he kept the evidence for 26 more years, until he died. His letter to me said he was sorry he didn't have the courage to release it publicly. He was afraid of what it might do to me, to Rebecca, to have everything dragged back up. So he left it for me to decide. Rebecca pulled out Harold's letter, now laminated to preserve it. She handed it to the investigator. My father was a whistleblower who was silenced. My mother was a victim who was shot to keep that silence. Both of them carried this for over 50 years. We're breaking the silence now. The detective asked the question everyone was thinking. Why now? Why not years ago, decades ago? Eleanor looked at Grace, preserved in her container, because I couldn't let her go, as long as she was inside me. Harold's lie protected us. If I'd told the truth, had surgery, let doctors see the bullet, there would have been questions, an investigation. Walsh was still alive until 1998, still powerful, still dangerous. I couldn't risk Rebecca, couldn't risk losing her the way I'd lost Grace. But you're telling us now, because Harold asked me to, because I died on that operating table and I saw them. Harold and Grace and Sue Jin, they were together, at peace. But they asked me to come back, to tell the truth, to clear their names, all their names. The detective shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Hutchins, you understand how this sounds. A near-death experience isn't evidence. I don't care how it sounds. I know what I saw, and I have 52 years of physical evidence. Eleanor gestured to Grace, to the bullet in its container on the table. My daughter. The bullet that killed her and should have killed me. Harold's documents. The trajectory analysis Dr. Richardson can provide showing the shot came from behind. Witness statements about Korea. It's all here. Everything you need. The military investigator was still reading. His expression grew darker with each page. Finally, he looked up. This is going to cause a significant scandal. Major Walsh received a Silver Star. He's buried at Arlington. There's a VFW post named after him in Virginia. I don't care about scandal, Eleanor said. I care about truth. Harold was called a coward, a drunk, a man broken by war, but he was a hero who refused to execute a child. Soo Jin was called a casualty of war, her death justified, but she was murdered. Grace never had a name, never existed in any record. Now she will. Rebecca placed her hand on her mother's shoulder. We're releasing everything. Full documentation to the press, to military investigators, to the Korean government. Soo Jin's family has a right to know what happened to her. Harold's record deserves to be corrected. Grace deserves to be remembered. Pastor Thomas spoke up for the first time. The truth will set you free. That's what Scripture says. Eleanor has been in prison for 52 years, a prison made of silence and lies and a bullet she carried in her body. She's free now, and she's going to make sure everyone else is free too. Harold, Soo Jin, Grace, all the victims of Walsh's crimes, all the soldiers who were silenced like Harold was. The detective closed his notebook. Mrs. Hutchins, I need to ask, are you prepared for what's coming? Media attention? Investigation? Potentially testifying if any of Walsh's accomplices are still alive, reliving this trauma publicly. Eleanor looked at Grace one more time. Then she met the detective's eyes with a strength that belied her 72 years and 3 days post-surgery. I carried a dead baby and a bullet for 52 years, she said quietly. I think I can handle the truth. September 2024, 1 month after surgery. Eleanor stood on her front porch in Grayson, watching the sun rise over the Appalachian Mountains. The same view she'd seen every morning for 72 years, but everything looked different now. Lighter. The world itself seemed to have more color. Her hand moved to her abdomen, an unconscious gesture, 52 years old. But now, instead of the hard, familiar mass, there was only the ridge of scar tissue. She was lighter by 6 pounds, lighter by a lifetime of secrets. The town had welcomed her home with a parade. A parade. In Grayson, where nothing ever happened. Where the last parade had been for the bicentennial in 19th Main Street had been lined with people, 2,000 souls from surrounding towns, veterans groups, Korean American organizations who'd driven from Pittsburgh and beyond. The banner stretched across Main Street read, Welcome home, Eleanor. Welcome home, Harold. Because that's what this was. Really. Harold's homecoming. 53 years late. The farmhouse had been cleaned by church ladies, every surface scrubbed, fresh flowers in every room. But Harold's boots still sat by the door. Eleanor had asked them not to move those. Some things needed to stay. Rebecca's car was parked in the driveway. Her daughter had taken a 6-month leave from her hospital in Pittsburgh, moved back to Grayson. Making up for lost time, she'd said simply. They were learning to talk to each other, really talk. No more silence, no more secrets. Today was the first of the ceremonies. Grace's burial was at 10 o'clock at Grayson Memorial Cemetery, the small plot on the hill where 5 generations of Hutchins rested. Harold's grave was there, the earth still raw from February. Next to him, they'd prepared a space. Eleanor walked to her bedroom, to the dress Rebecca had helped her choose. Navy blue, simple, dignified. As she dressed, she looked at herself in the mirror, really looked for the first time in decades. The scar across her abdomen was visible above the waistband of her slip. She traced it with her finger, a badge of survival. The small cemetery was full when Eleanor arrived. 200 people, maybe more. The calcified remains of Grace Hutchins rested in a tiny white casket, sized for an infant. Eleanor had spent an hour with her the day before, saying goodbye properly, touching the calcium surface, feeling the tiny fingers one last time. The headstone was simple. Grace Hutchins, beloved daughter, Hunter carried in love. Pastor Thomas stood at the graveside, his worn Bible open. But before he could begin, Eleanor stepped forward. She'd prepared words, written them down, rehearsed them. But now, standing at the grave of the daughter she'd carried for 52 years, the prepared speech felt wrong. She spoke from her heart instead. I carried you because I couldn't let go. I carried you because you were all I had left of hope after your father was broken by what he'd seen. I carried you because loving you was the only thing that felt pure in a world full of lies. Her voice broke, but she continued. But I understand now. You were never mine to carry alone. You were Harold's. You were Rebecca's sister. You belong to all of us. I'm sorry it took me so long to share you. She placed the baby blanket she'd knitted in deep, kept all these years, in tissue paper into the grave. Rest with your father now. Grace, rest knowing you were loved. Rest knowing your life, however brief, mattered. Rebecca stepped forward, placing wildflowers on the casket. I never knew you, little sister, but I felt you my whole life, in Mom's distance, in Dad's silences. You shaped our family even in death. Thank you for bringing us back together. They lowered Grace into the earth beside Harold. Eleanor didn't cry. She'd done her crying. Now there was only peace. The second ceremony came a week later. The military honors for Harold. The Army had moved quickly once Eleanor released the evidence. Major Edmund Walsh's Silver Star was revoked posthumously. His name removed from the VFW post in Virginia. The official record corrected 17 war crimes, 47 civilian deaths. A monster in a decorated uniform. Harold's record was amended. The PTSD diagnosis acknowledged as moral injury from witnessing war crimes. The accidental shooting removed from his file. And 2 medals issued posthumously. Purple Heart for the gunshot wound in Korea, and from Walsh, Bronze Star for valor, for attempting to stop war crimes at risk to his own life. Eleanor stood in her Sunday dress as a young officer presented her with a folded flag and the medals. A 21-gun salute echoed across the cemetery. Taps played, the notes floating over the mountains. Then came the surprise that broke Eleanor completely. An elderly Korean man approached, supported by a younger woman. He was perhaps 78, his face weathered but kind. He bowed deeply to Eleanor. "Mrs. Hutchins," the younger woman translated. "This is Kim Jin-ho. He is the younger brother of Kim Soo-jin. He was 3 years old when his sister died. He has traveled from Seoul to meet you." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Jin-ho reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, the same one from Harold's trunk. But this was the original. Soo-jin, young and beautiful and doomed. Through the translator, Jin-ho spoke. "My family never knew what happened to her. The Americans said she was caught in crossfire. We believed it for 72 years. Then we received your letter, the truth." His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for honoring my sister. Thank you for remembering her. Your husband tried to save her. He is a hero to my family." He presented Eleanor with a traditional Korean hanbok, deep blue silk embroidered with cranes. "In our culture, cranes represent peace and longevity. My sister would want you to have peace now." Eleanor embraced him. Two elderly survivors of the same violence, separated by an ocean and a lifetime, connected by grief and, finally, truth. The media coverage was extensive. "Woman carries stone baby for 2 years. Exposes military cover-up," ran in every major newspaper. Medical journals published papers on Eleanor's case. The Smithsonian requested Grace's remains for their medical collection. Eleanor agreed, wanting her daughter's existence to teach others. But the real change came quietly. The Eleanor Hutchins Act, proposed by the West Virginia congressional delegation, passed both houses within 6 months. It provided protections for military whistleblowers and mandated an independent investigation of war crime allegations. 12 other soldiers came forward with stories of being silenced about atrocities they'd witnessed. The military opened investigations into all of them. Eleanor's memoir, carried a love story across 2 wars, became a bestseller. All proceeds went to veterans' mental health charities and organizations supporting survivors of military sexual violence. But Eleanor's favorite moments were the quiet ones. Wednesday dinners with Rebecca, teaching her daughter to make Harold's favorite cornbread, sitting on the porch in Harold's chair, feeling the Wyoming evening breeze, no longer carrying the weight that had defined her entire adult life. Rebecca's children, Eleanor's grandchildren, visited now. 3 kids who'd barely known their grandmother before, now running through the farmhouse, filling it with noise and life. One evening, Rebecca found her mother on the porch, hand resting on her abdomen in that old unconscious gesture. "Does it still hurt?" Rebecca asked gently. Eleanor looked down at her hand, then smiled. "No, I carried her so long. Sometimes I forget she's gone. Then I remember she's not gone." "She's at rest. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed Eleanor's entire life. Her marriage, her loss, her silence, her survival. "Mom," Rebecca said, "do you have any regret?" Eleanor thought about that, about 52 years of carrying Grace, about the lies that had protected them and imprisoned them, about the truth that had finally set them free. I regret the silence, she said finally. Not the carrying. Oh, we all carry something. The question isn't what we carry. It's whether we carry it alone. She reached over and took Rebecca's hand. I carried her alone for 52 years, but I'm not alone anymore. Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand. They sat together as darkness pulled. 3 generations of women, Eleanor, Rebecca, and the memory of Grace, finally at peace. Inside the house, on the mantel, 3 photographs sat in frames. Harold in his uniform, young and trying to smile. Grace's headstone to white marble against green grass. And a new photo, Eleanor and Jin Ho, embracing at Harold's grave. 2 survivors choosing forgiveness over bitterness. The wind chimes Harold had made 40 years ago sang in the breeze. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in half a century, she felt light, free, whole, home. Eleanor's story isn't just about carrying a stone baby for 52 years. It's about the weight we all carry in silence, the secrets that protect the ones we love, the truths too painful to speak, the grief that calcifies inside us until we forget what it feels like to be light. How many of us have spent decades carrying something we thought we had to bear alone? A regret, a loss, a silence that grew heavier with each passing year. Eleanor taught us that it's never too late to put down that burden. She was 72 when she finally let go, when she finally told the truth, when she finally allowed herself to heal. And in doing so, she didn't just free herself, she freed her daughter, honored her husband, gave voice to a murdered girl half a world away, and reminded us all that love doesn't mean suffering in silence. It means having the courage to speak, to forgive, to reconnect, to come home to the people we've held at arm's length because we were too afraid to let them see our wounds. What have you been carrying that you're ready to release? Is there someone you've been silent with for too long? Share your story below because nobody should carry their burden alone. Your words might be the permission someone else needs to finally be free.